When you find out that Goldberg and Hulk Hogan had a conversation just 1 week before the Immortal One passed away, it hits different. We're talking about two absolute titans of professional wrestling, men who defined entire eras, who battled each other in some of the most memorable moments in WCW history, and who apparently had a bond that went way deeper than anyone realized. Grab your tissues and your Hulkamania bandanas because this one's going to take you on an emotional roller coaster. Let's start with the context that makes this story even more powerful. Goldberg and Hulk Hogan weren't just colleagues who occasionally crossed paths at wrestling events. These were two of the biggest names in the history of the business, guys who could sell out arenas just by showing up. The Man and the Hulkster were instrumental in making both World Championship Wrestling and WWE the juggernauts they became. When you think about the Monday Night Wars and the peak of wrestling popularity in the late 90s, these two names are always in that conversation. Their in-ring history is the stuff of legend. One of Goldberg's most iconic WCW title wins came from defeating Hogan in the late 90s, a moment that cemented Goldberg as a legitimate main event player and showed that even the seemingly invincible Hulkster could be conquered. That match on Nitro drew massive ratings and created a passing of the torch moment that fans still talk about decades later. These weren't just two guys who happened to work for the same company. They were connected through some of the most significant moments in wrestling history. But here's where the story shifts from wrestling history to something deeply personal. In a recent interview on Real Talk with Mike Burke, Goldberg opened up about his relationship with Hogan in a way that reveals a side of their connection most fans never knew existed. Goldberg admitted he was pretty close with Hogan, though he clarified they didn't hang out all the time. It's the kind of friendship that exists in the wrestling business, where schedules are insane, everyone's traveling constantly, and deep connections happen in scattered moments rather than regular hangouts. What Goldberg said next is where this gets really emotional. He talked about how Hogan was a huge influence in his life, not just as a wrestler but as a mentor and guide. Goldberg said Hogan taught him things he never had to teach him, took time with him in situations where he had no obligation to do so. Think about what that means. Hulk Hogan, the biggest star in wrestling history, the guy who could have coasted on his legacy and ignored everyone around him, chose to invest time and energy into helping Goldberg navigate the business. That kind of mentorship is rare in any industry, but it's especially rare in professional wrestling, where egos are massive and everyone's competing for the same spotlight. For Hogan to see something in Goldberg and actively work to help him succeed speaks volumes about both men. Goldberg acknowledged that people sometimes do things for certain reasons, implying that mentorship in wrestling can be strategic or self-serving. But he made it clear that Hogan was different. Hogan was a good dude who treated Goldberg with respect, even on the days when things weren't perfect. Then comes the gut punch moment. When the interviewer asked Goldberg about the last time they talked, his answer was simple but devastating. About a week before. 1 week before Hulk Hogan passed away at the age of 71 on July 24 earlier this year, Goldberg had a conversation with him. We don't know what they talked about, whether it was catching up on life, discussing wrestling, or just checking in like old friends do. But knowing that Goldberg was one of the last people to speak with Hogan before he died adds a layer of tragedy and significance to their relationship. Imagine being in Goldberg's position. You have a conversation with someone who's been a massive influence on your life and career, not knowing it's the last time you'll ever speak to them. Then a week later they're gone, and you're left processing not just the loss of a legend but the loss of someone who personally impacted your journey. That's heavy in a way that goes beyond typical celebrity deaths. This was someone Goldberg knew, learned from, and respected on a personal level. The wrestling world lost an irreplaceable icon when Hulk Hogan passed away. We're talking about a man who transcended wrestling and became a global phenomenon. Hogan was the face of WWE during its explosive growth in the 80s. He was the centerpiece of WrestleMania, the reason millions of kids started training, saying their prayers, and eating their vitamins. He headlined more major shows than most wrestlers even dream of appearing on. His impact on popular culture extended far beyond the wrestling ring, making him recognizable even to people who had never watched a single match. Vince McMahon himself explained why pushing Hogan was such an easy decision. In an interview with TMZ, McMahon revealed that he envisioned Hogan as exactly what America wanted. That's not just promotional talk. Hogan had that rare combination of charisma, look, and presence that made him the perfect ambassador for professional wrestling during a time when the industry was trying to break into the mainstream. He was larger than life in every sense of the phrase, a real-life superhero who kids wanted to be and adults couldn't stop watching. The void left by Hogan's passing is something that will never truly be filled. You can't replace someone who was that foundational to an entire industry. Every wrestler who came after Hogan, including Goldberg, stood on the shoulders of what the Hulkster built. The template for wrestling superstardom that we still see today was largely created by Hogan. The idea that a wrestler could cross over into movies, television, and mainstream pop culture started with him. Future generations will always be chasing the level of impact and recognition that Hogan achieved. What makes Goldberg's revelation even more poignant is how it humanizes both men. We often think of wrestling legends as these larger-than-life characters who exist in a separate reality from the rest of us. But this story reminds us that behind the characters, the entrances, and the championship reigns, there were real relationships, real mentorship, and real friendship. Hogan taking time to help Goldberg wasn't about business strategy or maintaining his position. It was about one human being helping another navigate a difficult and unforgiving industry. The fact that Goldberg spoke to Hogan just a week before his death is a reminder of how fragile and unpredictable life is. We never really know when our last conversation with someone will be our last. Hogan was 71, which isn't young but isn't ancient either. He had already outlived many of his contemporaries who left us too soon. But even at 71, his death felt sudden and shocking to the wrestling community. It's a sobering reminder that we should cherish the relationships we have with the people who matter to us while we still can. Fans continue to miss Hogan's presence, and it's easy to understand why. He wasn't just a wrestler, he was a cultural touchstone. He represented an era of wrestling that many fans grew up with, an era where the good guys and bad guys were clearly defined, where the stories were larger than life, and where anything felt possible. Watching old Hogan matches and promos now carries a bittersweet feeling.